All right, welcome everybody. Happy Friday to another edition of Leadmore Live. It's good to see some familiar faces here in the chat. Alex, Nick, Jade, what's up? And of course, my friend Maddie. Maddie, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm already seeing people I know. This is so exciting.
Yeah, you know some of these folks. That's great. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, we have some really awesome people in our community here of Leadmore, and it's fun to do this on a Friday morning. I don't know what you find in your kind of your group of folks, what days of the week work best, but we're still experimenting with that. So we had been doing
totally.
Wednesdays. Now Fridays are fun because it just feels like you kind of made it to the end of the week a little bit more chill.
100%.
So for those watching live, some of them I know you, but for anybody watching the recording, before we get into the show today, tell us, Maddie, what you do and what you're working on these days.
Yeah, well, my name is Maddie Peschong, and I honestly I struggle a little bit with my title lately, but I probably most qualify as a creative entrepreneur. I got my start as a photographer, and that is still a lot of what makes up, or some of what makes up my business. Um, And in addition to that, we own a photography studio. And so going into the holiday season, I've been working on that quite a bit, trying to figure out different ways that I can support local photographers as they head into just a very busy season with October and the holidays. So how we can support them and how we can create places for
Yeah,
them to create. And then I also just started the second round of my mastermind. And so a lot of my time right
cool.
now is spent with women and just helping them grow their businesses.
And that's group, one-on-one, both.
Yes. So it's essentially a group coaching program, but then there are some levels that include more one-on-one coaching. So it just kind of depends on the person, but
Yeah,
it's a really active group this time. There's a lot of chatter, and so it makes it so much more fun.
that's great. That's great. And I'm guessing you improve it each time. You learn a lot from the last time. There's lots of tweaks you can make.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly right. And it's interesting too, just seeing the different personalities that come in. I think last group's it was such a good group, but it was a little bit more quiet. And so to have a
Okay.
group like this that is really like ready to go and they're active and they're just more talkative and want to get stuff done, it's been a little bit of a fun change of pace. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
that's great. I don't know how you would get this information, but so I'm curious if there is an answer. But as a photographer, any idea, and then owning the studio, how many photographers there are in Sioux Falls? Is there any way to
So many.
quantify that?
So many. I think just the photographers that have rented our space, we opened in February. And since then, I think I have about like 75-ish people that have rented the space. A lot of them, usually more than once. If they rent it once, they're usually back. And
Wow.
that's a fraction. Like it is
Yeah.
a fraction of what's here. So there's so many, and it's such a great community to own a small business in, to own a business in, but also to specifically own a photography business. And so it's been really fun to figure out different ways to kind of support that community that gave me such a great start.
Yeah. Yeah. We could go on for a whole hour just about how that business has changed because I'm so fascinated how
Yeah.
everybody's businesses have changed. I've seen for a while in the spring, it was sort of like the stoop photography, and then I'm sure things have changed again. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, really interesting stuff. Well, what I want to talk about today is this concept of building a brand, and I'm calling it building like a leader brand. Everybody in Leadmore, I would say already is a leader, but maybe not by title. Like they're
Hmm.
becoming and growing into their leadership role and career, which is what the whole point of this group is, to have a safe community, a place to talk through some of these challenges, ask these questions, bring in experts like yourself. We had you on the podcast, I think about episode 16 or 15 or 16 a few weeks
Yeah.
ago, which was a great response. And when I think about building a brand, you are one of the first people that comes to mind. And you've done it in so many different ways. So what I want to do is I'm going to let you go first, and I have some questions. But
Yeah.
let's start with sort of the Maddie Peschong, take us to school on how to build a brand online.
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of walk through how the evolution has looked for me because I think that that's important.
Yeah,
I think a lot of the women that I coach and work with, it's easy to get frustrated if like you don't know right away like what your thing is and what. And the reality is like it's going to evolve and it's going to change, and that's actually a really great thing. So like we talked about at the beginning, I started as a photographer, and since I quit my day job about 2.5 years ago, my business has really grown a lot of different legs. And I'm still a photographer, and I primarily work with personal and commercial brands. So even in the photography realm, that's what I'm helping people do, is capture images so they can grow their brand in some way. But that's a small part of my business now. So I mentioned the studio. I sell digital products online. I run a podcast, which admittedly is on a bit of a break right now. It was
We should mention
casualty of the pandemic.
you just had a baby recently too, your
Yes,
third.
a casualty of the pandemic and having a baby. So it'll be back. So that's been wonderful. And then what takes up most of my time is the group coaching program. And whether it is creating systems or scaling your marketing, that's usually what we're working on in that program. So with all the different directions that my business has taken in the last few years, what's continued to remain at the center is that it's a very personal brand. It's me, no matter what project that I'm working on or what I want to take on next, the commonality is really that it's just me, and it's my mission, which at the end of the day is to help women discover the magic that's inside of them so they can show up confidently. And sometimes that's through a photo shoot, and sometimes that's through giving them a space to create. Sometimes that's through a digital product that can help take it to the next level. But whatever it is, they can be totally assured that they're always getting me and my brand and my personality. And that kind of started when we moved to Sioux Falls, and both my husband and my mom, who are like my two biggest supporters, they said, they were like, you're not going to do this photography thing full time, right? Because like there's a lot of photographers in Sioux Falls, and looking back, like they were just taking care of me. They were just scared. Like they didn't mean any harm by it. But
sure,
as someone who tends to kind of be an achiever, I was like, yes, I can. Like I can do that.
yeah,
And as I started to grow my brand, it continued to I shouldn't say continued. I started to infuse more and more of myself into my brand, because that was the easiest way that I found to stand out, because there were a ton of photographers in the area, and I honestly wasn't going to be able to compete on talent. Like that wasn't going to happen. My skill level is fine, but
sure,
I have other things that I'm bringing to the table, and that's what I wanted people to book me for. And when I started doing that, I realized that I was attracting clients who didn't just want my service, but wanted me. And they were so much easier to serve when we just kind of jived in that way. So it made life a lot easier.
yeah,
And I think it started as with things as simple as like infusing myself into my copy, like my website copy, my marketing copy. I've always really liked to write, but not the way that they teach you in 11th grade English. Like that wasn't really my jam. And so I started writing the way that I talked. And I got a lot of comments on that. Like people would meet me in real life and say, "Oh, you talk just the way that you write. Like that's so cool." And
so
so they felt
break
like,
that down. Like, does that mean like personal pronouns obviously on your website
yeah,
copy, and maybe a little more
yep,
informal?
super informal. Terrible punctuation usually. Like I sometimes my mom worked for me a little bit this year, which was really cool, and she wrote for the podcast. And it was always funny. She's very good at taking on my voice, and it was always
Yeah,
funny
sure.
to see like where she would punctuate and stuff. And I as somebody who is like a professional writer, I didn't realize necessarily that I was doing that, but I totally was. Taking breaks, and I love lists, and so I would like list things off and just kind of
Sure.
ramble, tons of run-on sentences, just the way I talk.
Lots of commas. Yep.
Lots of commas. Yep, exactly. And even, making up words, or not even so much making up words, but using words that are on trend in copy, like as just a part of what you're talking about.
Sure.
Because generally the people who are reading that, they're aware, like they know what a selfie is. They know, that's maybe a bad example, but you can use
Yeah.
those words and make it a little bit more personal to them. So that I think was a big part of it. And then I think a lot of it too was blurring the personal and professional line a little bit. I spent a lot of time. So my first job was in like hardcore corporate America, and it was a wonderful, wonderful job that did have a lot of freedom, more than other corporate jobs, but the company itself was very corporate. And I really struggled with that separation of church and state kind of thing. I felt like I had to be very professional at work, and I couldn't completely be myself, because as much as I was professional, I also I'm chatty, and I probably curse too much, and I probably like all these things that are like not appropriate for the workplace, right?
Yeah.
But when you're building your own brand, whether it is an actual business of yours, or you're just building a brand so someone will hire you and you can kind of grow in that leadership role, it's okay to let those things kind of seep in a little bit so people understand who you are, like who you really are. It makes it, I think, easier to work with you too when they kind of understand some of those personal things, not just the professional.
Yeah.
It makes it a really interesting it's a really interesting way to lead, because I think that there are a lot of people who feel that same pull to keep everything very, very separate. And there's a lot of freedom in finding the middle ground of, I can still be a professional, but I'm also going to be myself, and start infusing a little bit more of myself and my personality into this brand that I'm building, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And so it sounds like what you're really hitting on here is that using your personal brand can be a unique sort of identifier or separator from you and your competition, right?
Absolutely. I think in my opinion, it's the easiest way to stand out, because again, there are so many photographers, there are so many attorneys, there are so many dentists, like no matter what it is that you're doing, there are so many of those people. So what are you doing to stand out? And sometimes it is that simple, infusing your personality, but a lot of the time it can be more than that. And it should be more than that. But it doesn't have to be where you're certainly not airing your dirty laundry or sharing more than you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Some of the time it's just letting people into the behind the scenes a little bit, showing them. And when I say showing people, I use social media a lot. And so that's the way that I kind of do it. But whether that's through an email list or traditional marketing or whatever, showing them a behind the scenes, letting them see the not so curated and perfect parts of your business or your life, and maybe even giving them a say in it. I see boutique owners, for example, and they'll go to market and let people kind of choose the different things that they can bring home. And just instead of acting like everything is this, perfect and has a nice little bow wrapped on top of it all the time, showing the stuff that has to happen behind the scenes to keep everything chugging along. That's okay. That's a really good thing. And when it comes back to being that leader brand too, I think education is a huge way to do that. And people get nervous about educating because they think what if I'm training my competition? Like, what if this person is going to come and take all my business from me? But I think you just have to remind yourself, like, there are billions of people on the planet, and you can't possibly serve all of them. And the more people that have businesses like yours, the more ways other people are able to be served. And that's better for everybody.
How about, I wanted to ask you related to that point of, as a leader brand, teaching. So there's the part of like the fear maybe of competition or educating you, but also maybe that imposter syndrome of like, what do I have to share? Like, who wants to actually learn from me? I think when we talk about building a leader brand, that a big part of the podcast or the show is that no one like anoints you a leader, right? It's not like you graduate from college and you get your leadership diploma and now you're a leader. Like, the whole point of this show is that everybody already has a leader inside of them, and at certain points of their life they have been one. So how do you answer that question when just maybe a coaching client of yours is like, well, what do I share? Like, who wants to hear from me?
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the very practical, what do I share? That's a lot easier. It's what are people asking you? What are the emails that you receive when you're scrolling Instagram? Like, what are the questions that people have? You kind of put your client hat on or your consumer hat on a little bit, and just think, what do I wish I knew 5 or 10 years ago? So that's easier to answer. It often does take a little bit of a helping hand because we're oftentimes so close to it. It's really hard for us to understand, like, oh, there are people who don't know how to take like a good photo of themselves or their kids. Like, that is maybe something that a photographer would not realize, but a mom with young children, like, that's a need that she has.
Sure.
So that's a little bit easier. But when you get to talking about imposter syndrome, that's hard. And that's something that, I mean, I've been in business 10 years, but in the last 3 is when it's really, when I've really taken the time to grow it. And I think maybe at some point I thought, when I get to a certain point, I won't have this feeling anymore. And so far, that's not been the case. I kind of am thinking that's never going to go away.
No.
It just changes. And I think I have gotten better at dealing with it. If I were to have a client come to me and, want to have this conversation, which I do often, I think the biggest thing to remember is whatever you're scared of. So really identify what you're scared of. If you go live on Instagram today and you teach everybody how to do XYZ, like, what about that terrifies you? Is it, what will people think? Is it, what if I mess up? Is it, what if nobody shows? Like, actually identify what those fears are, and then understand that all of those things are happening when you don't do it. So people are, they're not showing up if you're not showing up. So that's already happening. And whatever they think of you, I think what I often have to remind myself is that I'm thinking a whole lot more about myself than anybody else is. And, that's something that they teach in middle school and high school. Like, you're so much more concerned about yourself than anyone else is. And if someone truly does have a problem with the things that I'm sharing, it's likely more of a reflection of themselves than it is of me. As long as I'm doing it from a place where I can be proud and I'm being authentic, it's generally going to be maybe coming from a place of fear for themselves, maybe even jealousy because they didn't think of it first. It's not because of anything that I'm doing. And that's so much easier said than done, but it's just like a constant mantra that you have to remind yourself.
Yeah. I spoke to Leadership South Dakota group yesterday, and they, at the end, they're like, what's one piece of advice, like one tip you'd give to a leader? And what I said, and this is kind of inspired from Brett Hagler's episode last week, episode 18, was we spend so much of our life trying to fit in when the strategy should probably be to fit out, right? And to be sort of your unique you. And Brett talked about how bold and rare, we don't, like, the world rewards things that are bold and rare, and we just don't have enough of them. And so think big, like, be your unique self, stand out. So I think that's really good. Let's open up for questions if you're cool with that.
I would love that.
A good group. So you can either put it in the chat to the folks in the chat if you want to, who are here live. You can, there is a way, let's see, how do you do that? I'm trying to remember if you can raise your hand too, if you want. And we can even bring you on audio or video if you're comfortable. So go ahead and put the questions in the chat or raise your hand. I will ask the first one as people sort of start thinking about what they want to ask. Let's talk about, I know it's not about the platforms, it's more about creating the content and doing the work and having things to say. But what do you feel about, like, platforms? Like, what should, like, I even noticed, I think since we did a podcast a few weeks ago, you've made, what do they call them? Instagram Reels, right?
Yes.
So, like, how do you weigh, like, do you go, I've often heard the advice, like, be really good at one before you worry about trying to do all of them, or do you try to be where your audience is? Do you do the hot next thing? Like, talk about the platforms, the tools.
Yeah, it's easy to get shiny object syndrome in the digital realm because there's constantly something new. And I always try to remind myself, like, when I worked at a marketing firm and we would have clients that would you know, they would just get an Instagram and then they would come to us and say, well, what about TikTok or what about Twitter? And I would always remind them, like, it is so much better for us to just really nail the one platform before we even think about going somewhere else. And so I'm constantly reminding myself of that. And it's not as difficult for me anymore, because I think I'm in a season of life where I want to do the stuff that's fun, and the stuff that's not fun and not as easy, I'm letting that fall away a little bit more, just because we're busy at home too. And so I have to have a business that works for my life. And so it's really focusing mostly for me on Instagram, but that doesn't mean, you know, that's what I recommend. It's truly like, what's most fun for you? What can you, even if you don't know the platform, what do you think you can sit down and try and figure out and try to learn? Because if that's not fun or exciting, you're not going to do it. So that's a big piece of advice that I'll tell people, like, what is fun? You don't have to be everywhere. Pick one, and what's the easiest? What can you do today? And I'm continually reminded that it's really, really important that you're creating a community that isn't someone else's. And when it comes to social media, like, those communities don't belong to us. They are wonderful, wonderful ways to get in touch with our people, but that Instagram doesn't belong to us. A Facebook group doesn't belong to us. And so making sure that, like, you're building an email list, or even like you have a website or you have a blog, like, even if it's not a place where you can kind of bring people, just having something that you own on the internet, that is kind of your home that you control, I think is going to be continually important, especially, you know, in an election year, when people are like maybe thinking they don't want to spend as much time on social media because it's not the happy unicorn place it usually is, you know, or has been.
Yeah, totally.
If that's the case, then give them another place to go where they can kind of like have that oasis. So
yeah,
email,
I think,
will be really big.
When we started out in 2009, like, the idea of buying a domain and starting your own website was actually kind of a heavy lift. Like, it was like, figure out how to do WordPress and then do and now, you know, open a Squarespace, pay $10 for a domain, and off you go. So
exactly.
Lisa, what's up? Lisa's here in the chat. She came
Lisa.
on video. I don't know if you know Lisa, but she's great. She's an awesome leader.
Yes.
Do you have a question for Maddie?
I do. Good morning, Maddie. Good morning, everyone. So my question is, so obviously you and I have both sort of been in the mom space, and we've connected many times in the past. I had a sense previously, and maybe you've experienced this too, of what I can only compare to like caregiver fatigue, in that you are constantly having moms ask questions about momming. And so that you end up being both a photographer and like this weird mom mentor / parent all the time. And I got really tired. And I wonder how you protect yourself from that, because I've seen the comments in your posts, and I know that it ends up kind of filtering over into other work outside of photography. And I'm just wondering how you protect yourself from that.
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the biggest thing I started doing last year was understanding that women, especially, like, we are cyclical creatures. That is literally how our bodies function, is like on a monthly cycle. Like that, it's that simple, right? And there are times that there are times that I feel like ready to take on the world, and I'm feeling very outward, and I want to speak and I want to talk and like do all the things. And there are other times that I want to watch Netflix and not talk to anybody and be a lot more introverted. And I used to really beat myself up for that and think like, why can't I be on all the time? Like, this is what the people like are expecting and what they want. But the reality is nobody functions like that. Like, nobody is on all the time. Beyonce puts on these amazing world tours for however long, a couple months, and then she goes into hiding and nobody knows where she is for 9 months. I mean, even Beyonce does that. So if Beyonce can do that, I can do that. And so I've gotten a lot better at just recognizing the fact that like I don't feel like it today. Like I just don't, and I'm going to honor that. And then when I do feel like it again, it's going to be that much more powerful because I gave myself the time to rest. And it's an evolving thing for sure, but I've gotten so much better at just being like, screw it, I'm just going to take a nap today. Like that's fine. Nobody's going to die.
I love that. Thanks so much, Matt. Perfect.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, I agree with that. This feeling that you have to have this like content, you have to be this like walking content calendar, right? And you have to have something every single day. I always laugh at the folks who, like I definitely would vouch or advocate for like a social media detox, but then the people who go on social media to tell you that they're going to do the social media detox, right? Like I won't be on Twitter for the next 3 days. It's like, okay, like thanks.
Yeah.
You didn't need my permission.
That's exactly it. When people do that, or they'll come back on and say like, you might have noticed I've been offline, and I've been guilty of even, thinking that. And whenever people draw attention to that, I'm like, oh, I literally didn't notice. And it's not because I don't love that person or love seeing them. It's just because there's a million other things going on. You do you take care of yourself first. The other stuff will fall into place.
Yeah, that's good. Anyone else in the chat want to ask a question? I want to make sure we have time for, I knew she'd have a question. It's our friend Alex. I think she might be your biggest fan.
Hi,
Alex is our intern this summer.
Adore her.
Hello. Yes. So I feel like maybe I know this answer, but I want you to share it with everyone else. What is like your top tangible tip that leaders can take today to improve their personal brand right away? Whether that's just, can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just got AirPods, so I was like nervous that I was just talking to nothing.
Welcome to 2020.
Tangible tip that they can take today to improve their personal brand, whether that's on whatever platform they reside, but I know you've got those mega tips.
So, see that one more time, Alex. I missed the very beginning of your question.
Yeah, just like your number one tangible tip that leaders can take from this today and put it into practice to improve their personal brand.
Yeah. Well, I am a firm believer that something that works for me might not work for somebody else. And so anytime that I give advice, I always like to preface it with that, because if I say something and you're like, ew, gross, no, I don't want to do that. Oh my gosh, don't do it. Like only if this works for you. But I think, when my business really started to grow to the point where like I had to quit my job, and I had to really make some decisions about like how I was going to grow it, because it kind of started to explode a little bit. I mean, for a one-person show was when I really put an emphasis on education and just sharing more about what I thought people wanted to learn. And that started with clients. So like what to wear for family photos, the locations that we should go to. But then it kind of evolved into photographers. My favorite locations in Sioux Falls and things like that I think a lot of photographers would maybe hold really close and say, I'm not going to share that. Like that's my top secret information. But the reality is it's not. And it's something that can make you really stand out as a leader in your community by being willing to share those things that other people might be keeping a little close to their chest. For no good reason. There's always going to be things in business that you probably don't want to share or can't share, and that's okay. But just keeping things close because you're worried about, it's that scarcity mentality, and you're worried about, other people finding out or other people copying you or something. Like if that's the reason, that's not a good enough reason. And so I think really leaning into education. And the online space is weird when you're building a personal brand, because I definitely got started like as a professional kind of in the education space, but then there are definitely times where I kind of teeter into that influency.
You know what you're trying to say.
Space. Yeah, I know. That space of kind of being an influencer, which is fine. But that is a little bit challenging for me because I also don't necessarily want people's opinions on like my life and my political views and how I'm raising my kids and all of that. And so when I start to feel a little like it's a little bit too maybe a little bit too personal, coming back to that place of education and like, how can I help? Really, that's it at the end of the day. How can I help? And just continuing to answer that question, that kind of tends to ground my business.
I think one thing to like kind of put my Lemonly hat on and capture that into sort of that, like Alex's question proves the point of like people online always want like really short snackable like list or to-dos or like one tip, one hack, right? Like I think you had a reel recently that was like how like 4 ways to make your bio better or something like that.
Yeah.
And I can't remember. And it was just really like, it was really digestible, right? It was like 4 things and you went boom, 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 boom. And I was like, oh, I'm only doing 2 of those things. And so to that education point, packaging up your education in a very consumable way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I get so chatty and like so excited about things and just remembering like how can I make this so simple, 1 2 3 4. That's an exercise I'm constantly having to practice, but that is what what people tend to really like because it's easy for them to understand. I can do this, I can do that, I'm done.
Yep. Anything else, Alex?
Oh man, I don't know. I was just soaking it all in.
Well, let's see. Let's see. Jade, Lise, we got Lise already, Nick, Travis. If you have any other questions for Maddie, we'll take a few more minutes here. Otherwise, we got one here. Oh, Jade just says, loves what you're doing. Thanks for bringing the sunshine this morning.
You're so sweet.
One thing, I'm gonna give you a minute to think about this, Maddie, and then I'll ask it last. But if I'm gonna put Maddie on the spot here and see if she has anything, you know, what we're excited about with Leadmore is like where we can kind of cross these communities. So like an offer or a pitch or something that she wants to offer to you guys as Leadmore members. So you can think about that. Travis says someone who just put on their first webinar yesterday. Thanks for the encouragement on education. Yeah, that's great. And I think that fits so closely to that point we talked about earlier about imposter syndrome, right? You have something to share. You definitely know something that other people don't know. And I think there's sort of like an age thing. I know Travis, and like if you're earlier in your career, you just assume that people aren't going to want to hear from you. But that's what the internet has made so powerful, right? Like we're learning that's not true, right? We're seeing some of the most influential, powerful, these one-person media companies from people who are still teenagers.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important when you do start looking at how you can educate, that, like you said, John, that imposter syndrome oftentimes really does start to creep in. And remembering that just because someone else has maybe done this before, like someone else has educated on this topic, it doesn't mean that there's not space for you. It's the same idea as, you know, if you had a professor in college who taught something and you really connected with it and it was awesome, and then the next year you had a very similar topic but a different professor and you didn't understand it near as well, you didn't connect with that professor. You know, we attract certain people and those people are ready to learn from us, and they may not be ready or in a place where they can learn from someone else teaching the exact same thing, just because styles are different. So even if you're talking about something that a million other people are talking about it, you're talking about it in the way only Travis can talk about it, and that's a really important thing. Your unique background and experience, and then timing too, right? Your point about I didn't even notice you were off social media for a while. Like sometimes like I think one of the tips that was so obvious to me that I never thought about was just like tweeting the same content again. You know, recognizing that like recycling it, you don't always have to create new stuff. You know, I think that we get on this hamster wheel of content creation that we always have to feel like we're creating new stuff. So I started taking Instagram content that had performed really well and putting it into an email drip campaign just to continually be in front of those people. And also, you know, a lot of those people were coming from like freebies that I was offering. And so very likely they didn't necessarily know me as well as somebody on Instagram. And so I started putting that content into an email campaign, and I get email. It's so cool. I regularly will get responses to these emails that'll say like, this is exactly what I needed to hear today. And I'm like, I wrote that 8 months ago on Instagram, but they don't know that and they didn't read it then. So we don't, you don't have to create something new every day. You just have to have a good strategy.
Yeah, that's great. Yep, amen, Travis. I agree. So we will wrap this up. We'll put the recording in the Leadmore community. Nick had a great tip. We might be inviting you to join the Leadmore community if you want to, Maddie. You can answer any questions. So what would you, as we wrap up here, where can people follow you, connect with you? And is there anything you want to offer to the Leadmore members? So as maybe a way to get started in your sphere of content.
Definitely. So I am, if you can believe it, I'm probably most active on Instagram. So you can follow me over there at Maddie Peschong. Everything is just first name, last name, Maddie Peschong. You can find me there. My website.
You got that unique last name, so that helps.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody else has that name. So so you can find me there. And I think, specifically if you're looking for different ways that you can kind of do everything we talked about today on Instagram, I have an Instagram checklist. I can put the link in the chat if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do that. And then I'll put it below we have the community platform used called Circle. And so I'll put that in the recording as well. Cool.
Yeah, so that's just a free checklist that you guys can use as you're just figuring out how to use Instagram to grow your own brand. And then if you head over to Instagram and follow me there, I am really excited about something I'm launching on Black Friday that's going to just continue to help people grow their brands on Instagram and make it easy for them to do so, whether that's through like stock imagery or templates or caption starters, whatever it might be. And so that's coming on Black Friday, and I haven't even really talked about it yet. So you're the first to know, and yeah.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and for teaching us today. We'll record this, we'll drop it in. And if there's any follow-up questions, I'll let you know too. So
awesome. Thank you guys so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, take care, Maddie. Thanks for your time. And it's good to see everybody. It's Friday afternoon here. Take care, Leadmore members. Have a great weekend. We'll see you.